The night pulsed with energy. The crowd at Wembley roared like a living sea, hands raised, voices united. Freddie moved across the stage with his usual fire, the king in his kingdom of lights and sound. Every move was electric, every word a spark. But then, in the middle of that thunderous ocean of faces, something stopped him. Near the front row, perched on her mother's shoulders, was a little girl, maybe 8, maybe 9. Her head was bare, reflecting the lights in soft glimmers. No wig, no shame, just a fragile brightness that cut through the chaos. Her eyes were wide, her smile pure and unwavering. Freddie froze for a heartbeat. For the first time that night, his voice softened mid-phrase. He saw her, really saw her. Behind that smile, he recognized something deeper, courage dressed as innocence. The kind of strength that doesn't shout, but simply shines. The band kept playing, unaware of what was happening in Freddie's heart. He took a slow step forward, closer to the edge of the stage, his gaze fixed on her. The cameras caught his expression, a mixture of surprise, tenderness, and something like reverence. It wasn't pity. Freddie never pitied anyone. It was connection, human, raw, unguarded. For a moment, the man who had conquered the world of rock stood still, overwhelmed by a single small life that refused to fade. The lights, the cheers, the glory, all dimmed before that one unbreakable smile, before that magical night. Emily's world was painted in hospital white, walls that smelled of antiseptic, corridors that echoed with quiet courage. She had spent the past year fighting a battle her small body shouldn't have known, but her spirit was unshakable. Every morning, her mother would place the headphones gently over her ears, and the sound of Queen would fill the room. "Don't Stop Me Now" wasn't just a song to her. It was her anthem, her armor, her escape. Emily dreamed of seeing Freddie Mercury live. She'd seen photos in magazines, watched recordings on an old TV with static lines cutting through the image. Yet she imagined the feeling of being there, the lights, the roar, the music that made her feel alive. Her mother, Laura, worked extra shifts at a cafe, saving every coin, not just for the tickets, but for the taxi, the warm coat, the chance to give her daughter one night where illness didn't exist. The doctors weren't sure she'd make it through the winter, but when Laura told them her plan, they smiled. "Then make it happen soon," one said softly. And she did. Against every practical concern, against the whispers of worry, Laura managed to get 2 tickets to Queen's concert in London. Emily's joy that day was quiet, the kind of happiness too big to fit in words. She held the tickets like treasures, her eyes bright, her heart racing. The day finally came. Wrapped in a pink scarf that hid her bare scalp, Emily walked hand in hand with her mother through the crowd outside Wembley. The music started even before they reached their seats. And as Freddie's voice filled the air, she whispered, "Mum, I can feel it. It's like he's singing right to me." Laura smiled through tears, not knowing how right her daughter would soon be. The air inside Wembley that night felt alive, electric, restless, untamed. Over 70,000 voices rose together as Queen launched into another anthem, the sound echoing across London like thunder. It wasn't just a concert. It was communion. Freddie, in his white tank top and crown-like confidence, ruled the stage with unmatched grace. Every note seemed to ignite the audience further, until suddenly, in the middle of it all, his gaze drifted again toward the front row. There she was, Emily, the little girl with the pink scarf. Her tiny hands clapped out of rhythm, her smile brighter than the spotlights themselves. Freddie's chest tightened. He could feel something stir within him. That same pull from earlier, stronger now, impossible to ignore. He missed his next line for a split second, the band glancing at him in confusion, but he kept going. He wasn't distracted, he was moved. Between verses, he stepped closer to the edge of the stage, scanning the crowd until he found her again. Their eyes met. For a heartbeat, it felt like the world stopped. The cameras, the noise, even the rhythm, everything faded. Only 2 souls remained. One fighting to live, the other trying to give meaning to life itself. Freddie raised a hand, almost as if asking permission from fate. Then, without a word, he pointed directly toward her. The spotlight followed his gesture. The massive crowd turned their heads, trying to see what he was looking at. A hush spread across the arena, the kind that no script could ever recreate. Emily blinked, unsure. Her mother's hands trembled as the security guards began to approach, motioned by Freddie himself. No one knew what he intended, not even the band, but everyone could feel it. Something extraordinary was about to happen. The massive crowd rippled like a wave as the security guards gently made their way toward the front. Laura, Emily's mother, held her daughter close, her heart racing in disbelief. "He's pointing at you," she whispered, her voice trembling. Emily's eyes widened, unsure whether to smile or cry. The noise of the crowd blurred into a single, endless hum as the guards motioned for them to follow. Step by step, they were led toward the stage that had once seemed a world away. Freddie waited at the edge, one hand on his chest, the other extended toward them. The lights dimmed slightly, a single spotlight illuminating his figure. His expression was soft, different, stripped of all theatrics. When Emily reached the barrier, he crouched down, meeting her at eye level. "Hello, darling," he said with that unmistakable warmth. "Would you like to come up here with me?" The audience gasped. Thousands of flashes erupted like stars as Laura helped her daughter climb into Freddie's arms. He lifted Emily effortlessly, careful as if holding something sacred. When her small feet touched the stage, the crowd erupted into applause that shook the air itself. For a moment, Freddie didn't move. He simply looked at her, at this little warrior who had fought so much harder than most adults ever would. He turned to the audience, his voice cutting through the noise. "This little lady," he said, "has more courage than all of us together." The crowd roared, some cheering, others in tears. Emily smiled shyly, holding tightly onto his hand. Freddie leaned closer and whispered something only she could hear. Whatever he said made her eyes light up, and she nodded. The next moment he took her hand and walked with her toward the center of the stage. The show was no longer a concert. It had become a moment of pure humanity. As the lights softened over the stage, the entire arena fell into a reverent silence. Freddie stood beside Emily, his hand still holding hers, his expression tender yet full of pride. The sound of 70,000 people waiting, not screaming, not chanting, but waiting in awe, was unlike anything Wembley had ever heard. Freddie looked down at her, smiled gently, and then slowly knelt to meet her eyes. Emily hesitated for a moment before stepping closer. Her pink scarf shimmered under the spotlight, and Freddie, without saying a word, opened his arms. The little girl leaned forward, and he embraced her, a long, sincere, fatherly hug that seemed to stretch beyond time. The crowd gasped, then applauded, and then they began to cry. It wasn't a show anymore. It was something sacred. A man who had built his life on performance had just given the most real moment of his career. When Freddie finally let go, he took her hand again and placed it over his heart. "Can you feel that?" he asked softly through the microphone. Emily nodded, her lips trembling into a smile. "That," he said, "is for you." The audience erupted into a roar of emotion, some shouting her name even though they didn't know it. The cameras caught the tears in his eyes, tears Freddie didn't bother to hide. He rose to his feet, still holding her tiny hand high in the air like a champion. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice cracking slightly, "this is what love looks like." The band, moved and wordless, began to play again, a soft, improvised version of Love of My Life. As the first chords rang out, Freddie knelt once more and let Emily rest her head on his shoulder. In that instant, the rock god became something greater, a symbol of kindness, vulnerability, and the kind of love that doesn't fade when the music stops. The music floated gently through the night, soft yet unbreakable. Freddie held the microphone in one hand and Emily's tiny fingers in the other. The crowd swayed like a sea moved by one heartbeat. Brian May's guitar whispered the first delicate notes of Love of My Life, but Freddie changed the words. He didn't sing the version the world knew. He sang something new, something just for her. "You are my little champion," he began, his voice trembling with emotion. "You fight the dark with your light." Each line flowed from him like a prayer. There was no rehearsal, no script, just pure truth dressed as melody. The audience listened in silence. No one dared break the spell. Emily looked up at him, her eyes shining with tears and joy all at once. Freddie smiled down, brushing a tear from her cheek with his thumb. Behind them, the lights dimmed to a single golden hue, wrapping them both in warmth. The entire arena became a cathedral of sound. 70,000 people united, not by fame, but by compassion. When Freddie reached the chorus, he lifted Emily's hand toward the sky. "You are love, you are light, you are hope tonight." He sang, his voice soaring higher than ever before. The crowd couldn't hold back anymore. Thousands joined in, not knowing the words but humming, crying, shouting. Some held lighters. Others simply closed their eyes. It was no longer a performance, it was collective grace. Freddie ended the song with a soft whisper, barely audible through the microphone. "Keep shining, darling." He kissed the top of her head, and the stadium erupted in applause so thunderous it felt like heaven itself was clapping. When the final chords faded into the night, Freddie didn't leave the stage right away. He knelt beside Emily once more, kissed her hand gently and whispered, "You made this night real, darling." The audience roared one last time as she waved to the crowd, her smile brighter than any spotlight. Then Freddie lifted her into his arms and carried her backstage, where the music's echo softened into quiet reverence. Behind the curtains, the band members approached silently. Brian, Roger, John, all visibly moved. No one spoke for a while. The little girl sat on a chair, still holding the microphone Freddie had given her. "You keep that," he said, placing his hand over hers. "That's yours now." Laura, her mother, could barely hold back her tears. "Mr. Mercury," she began, but Freddie stopped her with a gentle shake of the head. "No Mr. tonight, love. Just Freddie." He turned to one of the assistants and whispered a few words. Within minutes, someone returned carrying a small box wrapped in velvet. Inside was a delicate necklace, a tiny silver crown with the Queen emblem engraved beneath it. Freddie knelt again and fastened it around Emily's neck himself. "A queen deserves her crown," he said with a grin. But there was more. He took out a piece of stationery from the dressing table and began to write, a short, handwritten note that he sealed with care. "Give her this tomorrow," he told Laura, "and tell her, while I'm singing, she'll never be alone." Then he pulled Emily close for one last hug, resting his chin gently on her head. "Promise me you'll keep smiling," he whispered. Emily nodded, clutching the necklace. As she and her mother left the backstage area, Freddie stood silently at the doorway, watching them disappear into the corridor's dim light, his eyes shimmering not with sadness, but with something eternal, love that refused to end with the curtain. Weeks passed, and the memory of that night still glowed in Freddie's heart like a quiet flame. Between tours, recordings, and rehearsals, he often found himself thinking of Emily, the little girl who had reminded him that love, not fame, was his truest stage. Every so often he would ask his assistant, "Have we heard from her?" And one morning he did. A letter arrived, written in delicate handwriting, signed by Laura. Freddie opened it alone, sitting by the window of his garden lodge home. The words were tender and heavy. Laura thanked him for what he had given her daughter, a night beyond dreams. She explained that Emily's health had worsened after the concert, but that she had kept the necklace by her bed every day. Whispering, "Freddie said I'm never alone." When the end came, she was listening to "Love of My Life." Laura wrote, "She left this world smiling." "You gave her that?" Freddie pressed the letter to his lips and closed his eyes. For a long while he said nothing. Then he carefully folded the page and placed it in the top drawer of his dressing table, beside the rings, scarves, and keepsakes of a life lived loudly, but loved quietly. That letter never left the room again. Whenever he prepared for a concert, he'd open the drawer, glance at it, and whisper, "This one's for you, darling." In time, those close to him would notice a change, a deeper warmth behind the grandeur. On stage, when he sang "Love of My Life," there was always a moment when his gaze seemed to lift above the crowd, soft and far away. He never told the story publicly. He didn't have to. The promise he made to a little girl that night didn't end with the applause. It became part of his voice, echoing through every song, every silence, every heartbeat that followed. Years passed. The story of that night wasn't printed in newspapers or broadcast on television. It lived quietly in whispers, carried by those who had been there, those who had felt it. But as Queen's legacy grew, so did the legend. Fans began to speak of the moment when Freddie stopped a concert for a little girl. Some called it rumor, others miracle, but those who witnessed it swore it was real. And over time, something beautiful happened. It became a symbol. At concerts across the world, people began showing up with pink scarves tied around their heads, not for fashion, but in memory of Emily. No one announced it. No campaign started it. It was spontaneous, pure, and deeply human. Fans left flowers on the edge of the stage, letters folded with care, small drawings of crowns. Some even brought photos of loved ones lost to illness, whispering their names during Love of My Life. What Freddie had sparked in that one gesture had outgrown the moment itself. Even years after his passing, the image of Freddie kneeling beside that little girl became one of the most shared and cherished in Queen's history. It wasn't the grandeur of Live Aid or the glamour of fame. It was the gentleness of a soul that saw beyond applause. When documentaries spoke of his genius, that story always resurfaced. The day the man who defied conventions also defied indifference. The echo of that night never faded. It lingered in the hearts of those who understood what it truly meant to love without condition. And though Emily's voice was never heard again, her spirit lived on, not in charts or headlines, but in every person who wore a pink scarf to honor courage, kindness, and the man who saw a little girl and turned compassion into immortality. Time softened the edges of fame, but not the echo of that moment. Even decades later, fans and musicians alike spoke of Freddie not just as a legend, but as a man who carried light in his heart. Among the countless tales of excess and spectacle, the story of the little girl stood apart, quiet, pure, eternal. It reminded the world that beneath the sequins and thunder, there was a soul that believed deeply in love, in beauty, and in kindness. Those who knew him best said that Freddie changed after that night. His shows grew even more passionate, yet more human. He talked more about compassion in interviews, about using music to heal the spirit. When asked what made him happiest, he once replied, "When someone feels loved because of a song I sang, that's when I've done my job." To him, music wasn't about glory anymore. It was about connection, the invisible thread between hearts. As the years went on and his own health began to fade, Freddie often hummed "Love of My Life" in solitude. Friends recalled seeing him glance at the framed letter from Laura, still resting in the same drawer where he'd placed it years before. Sometimes he'd touch it gently and whisper, "Still with me, darling." For Freddie, that night was not a fleeting act of kindness. It was a promise that outlived him. Today, that story continues to travel, not through headlines, but through hearts. In every tribute, every cover, every fan who sings along with tears in their eyes, the spirit of that night returns. Because Freddie Mercury didn't just sing about love, he proved it. And on that stage, when he embraced a fragile little girl, he showed the world that true greatness isn't measured in applause or fame, but in the tenderness one leaves behind.